Well, good evening. I'd like to call to order this Committee of the Whole meeting for the Town of Sagging Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the chambers this evening. Before we proceed with the agenda, I think one of our town employees was tragically lost his life last year, Mr. Jack Dury, and if we would just take a moment of silence and think about him and his family and the time they're going through. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of their responsibility to do so. You can do so now or when it arises. None. We have no additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda. And this evening we have one delegation. It's Gabrielle, DeFrancesco. She's here about Municipal Heritage Committee and the June Callwood Award to the Sagging Rail Trail Association. And Gabrielle is there. You moved. Welcome.
Thank you for having us here this evening. Honorable Mayor, Council, and honored guests. As the nominator, the Municipal Heritage Committee is here today to help celebrate the Sagging Shores Rail Trail Association being awarded the 2017 June Callwood Award. As many of the board members were not able to attend the formal presentation in Toronto, we are pleased to honor them this evening. The June Callwood Award is named for the late journalist, author, and Order of Ontario recipient, June Callwood, who was one of Canada's most well-known social activists, founding or co-founding more than 50 Canadian social action organizations. In 2017, it was announced that the Rail Trail Association had been selected to be amongst the volunteer organizations in the province of Ontario to receive this prestigious award. Since 2009, 174 individuals and groups have received the June Callwood Outstanding Achievement Award for volunteerism. This award was presented in April during National Volunteer Week by the Honorable Laura Albanese, Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, on behalf of the Province of Ontario. MPP Lisa Thompson, riding Huron-Bruce, joined in handing out the award. The following synopsis appeared in the official program. Sagging Rail Trail Association has developed, maintained, and connected over 50 kilometers of accessible, non-motorized community trails since 1990. Used by countless people of all ages and abilities, the Sagging Rail Trail Association has improved the well-being of local residents and left a legacy for years to come. Their story. With the decommissioning of the Canadian National Rail lines in Port Elgin, Southampton, and Sagging Township in the 1980s, the Ontario Trails Council encouraged local governments to purchase the CN land. With vision and passion, Paul Bentley, a resident of Southampton, became the local trail vision driver, lobbying local councils and recruiting others who shared his dream of a network of public, fully accessible trails. Even though the Port Elgin Council initially purchased the CN land for potential residential and commercial development, Council, under the leadership of Mayor John Van Bastelaar, supported the creation of public trails as did Harry Tatey, Reeve of Sagging Township. In 1990, the Sagging Rail Trail Association was formally created and registered with the Canada Revenue Agency as a charitable organization. And it is estimated that over their 27-year history, memberships, donations, grants, and the value of the volunteer hours are in excess of $3 million. Building, preserving, maintaining, and enhancing accessible, safe, non-motorized trails for today and tomorrow, connecting healthy, vibrant communities forever. This vision and mission statement has provided a vital roadmap that has kept the rail trail true to its founding principles. The longevity and varied involvement of many of the current Sagging Shore Rail Trail board members attests to their passion, their commitment, and their dedication in serving the community of Sagging Shores. Joyce Scammell served on the first Rail Trail Board as Public Relations Director and is currently our president. Board members have often simultaneously held positions on other boards and executives, such as the Friends of McGregor Park, the Parks and Trails Committee, county committees, as well as other community organizations, enabling them to gain a deeper understanding of community needs while forming lasting and essential partnerships. Wow, the rail trail really knows how to stretch a dollar. In 1997, extensive lobbying by the Sagging Rail Trail Association resulted in the CNR asking price for the Southampton sections of land being reduced from $210,000 to only $10,000. I want them on my negotiating team. Thus enabling the town of Southampton, under the leadership of Mayor Art Eby, to purchase it. And in 2000, amalgamation created the town of Sagging Shores, and the rail trail worked with staff in the creation of a master plan that strengthened our trail and park system. Presently, the rail trail is fortunate to have two Sagging Shores councillors sit on their board, Cheryl Grace and Mike Myatt, ensuring a stronger shared vision and an effective working partnership. The time period from 1990 to 2006 saw a focus on expanding the trails and replacing the packed coal dust surfaces by grading, laying down stone dust, and landscaping. The rail trail, in partnership with Saw Green, an organization dedicated to tree planting, has planted over 3,000 trees. Significant milestones in the last decade, which have been achieved with widespread community support and partnerships, are in 2007, 2008, the Hurricane Hazel Memorial, 2009 and 10, the creation of a memorial garden in Southampton, where individuals can purchase a tree or a bench dedicated to a deceased loved one and come together at the annual memorial non-denominational service. The Mill Creek Bridge Restoration Project is a beautiful, beautiful project, and if you walk there, you can't believe that you're so close to the busy traffic, well, what I think of busy traffic of the downtown. In 2012-13, the All Aboard campaign saw the completion and opening of the Port Elgin Rotary Accessible Trailhead and Historic Train Station. Rotary paid $30,000 for the naming rights, and the rail trail partnered with the students and staff from Sagging Shores Secondary School to build the replica train station. The train station also houses plaques educating the community about our local rail history, serves as a rest station, and provides accessible washroom facilities. In 2015 and 16, to mark their Silver Jubilee, the Rail Trail raised $57,000 for the Trains to Ship Focus, which brings to life the important water and rail linking history of Sagging Shores. All aboard. At a cost of $19,000, mural artist Lambertus de Graaf painted an authentic 3D train departing from the center of the old factory on Highway 21 in Spence Street, now the Southampton Market. As the trains once loaded lumber off ships on the docks, transported it to the factory, and then transported the furniture made in Southampton to Western markets. We have a rich and proud history. It has been a long, challenging, and fruitful journey from the early beginnings of rugged coal dust corridors where users traveled at their own risk to well-insured, world-class, all-season trails. The Rail Trail Association continues to press on. Trail maintenance, supported by annual funding from the Sagging Council, is ongoing. East-west connecting links need further development. Bike racks have been designed and are in the process of being made and will be installed along the trails. And the memorial gardens continue to provide families and friends to remember their loved one while enhancing the natural beauty and comfort of the garden for all. The June Callwood Outstanding Achievement Award for Volunteerism not only recognizes and celebrates the work and accomplishments of the Sagging Rail Trail, but it also demonstrates for others how dedicated groups of volunteers with a clear vision, a positive and directed focus, and persistent efforts can make a significant impact on their community. Let us join together in celebrating the achievements of the Sagging Rail Trail Association. Thank you. And I just thought that you might like to see the plaque that was awarded at the presentation in Toronto, as well as a book about June Callwood and another award.
Thanks very much, Gabriel. I don't know if any committee member want to speak. Maybe I can speak on behalf of the committee. I think over the years, you've really, it's quite a story you've told here and put it all together for our council this evening. And it's been a real success story from the beginning. I know I can remember sitting with Councillor Shildroth many years ago in Harry Tatey, and it was not all that well accepted at the idea of a trail, and at that time there was a fair amount of opposition to it because they weren't going to be patrolled and they were worried about vandalism and that type of thing, and in the long run we've seen that proved wrong, and it's been a great asset to the community, not only the trails but the people that help make the trails and build our community. So on behalf of the town and the council, I want to thank everyone over the years that's contributed to the rail trail, because it's a big draw to people from all over Ontario. And if you want to bring the committee all up here, we can get a picture of this. Perhaps, I'm sure our press would like to get and perhaps you can introduce the rest of the committee that are here this evening too, Gabrielle, and we'll get the two councillors that are on committee, and we'll get the press.
Okay, if Joyce, would you like to do the introductions? Well, I just think as president that you might be the person just on the committee. Who's on the committee? So we have you, we have Larry.
Oh, sure. Well, we have Larry Van Wormer, Kathy Spence, Jerry and Lorraine Boucher, Bruce Alexander, Fred Shildroth, Dave Cheer, Gabrielle DeFresco, and Cheryl Grace and Mike Myatt are with us, and I introduced them tonight. Thank you.
The front here, we'll get
Yes,
a picture
if you
for
would come
the paper.
up.
Go ahead, Mike.
Mike, on behalf of the Rail Trail, I'd very much like to thank you. And I say Rail Trail, I mean members from 27 years ago. This is a public recognition, and we thank you very kindly, all of us.
Thanks very much, Steve. I think Councillor Grace has a comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I just also wanted to recognize Gabrielle DiFrancesco for the hours and hours of work that she put into preparing these applications. We were a very close finalist in 2016, and Gabrielle persisted and put in the application again, and we were recognized in 2017. So thank you, Gabrielle.
Thank you. So the next item on our agenda then is a general government staff report. It has to do with the 2016 financial statements, and I think our treasurer, I guess, Director of Finance, Mark Gaynor will introduce Mr. Bolton.
Thank you, Mayor. In the report, as you will notice, municipalities are required to present financial statements on an annual basis, and using the general accepted accounting principles for local government that are set out by the Public Sector Accounting Board by the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants. Under the sections of the Municipal Act, the auditors are to be appointed by council for a term, which we have just appointed BDO for another 5-year term, starting with 2017. The financial statements are consolidated statements, which means that they are not just the town of Sagging Shores, but the boards and commissions, etc., that are with us. And within 60 days of council receiving the financial statements, the treasurer is to publish a complete set. We will be putting them on the website, and the full copy at no cost to any taxpayer of the town that requires them. So tonight we have Michael Bolton of BDO, council-approved auditor, is attending the Committee of the Whole to present the 2016 audited financial statements.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor Smith, members of council. It's good to be here again to present the financial statements. There's some statutory things that I need to cover, And then I thought I'd go through the financial statements, not in detail, but highlighting some of the things I think may be importance to council. And then finally, I'll deal with the year-end report. So what's up on the screen there is not where I'm going to start. Part of the package that was distributed was the financial information or the actual financial statements, and that's where I'll be starting. I didn't want those posted, or they couldn't be posted because we have draft across them. They're still draft at this point until council approves them. So it apparently didn't show up very well with the big draft stamp on it. So part of the package is the independent auditors report. So of the other attachment that you have, it's on page number 2, entitled the independent auditors report, and that's our report to council and the ratepayers of the town about the findings of our audit. And as the Director of Finance mentioned, these are not just the financial statements of the town, they also encompass your share of Basra and your share of SMART. So when we're looking at the numbers, it's not just town information, but the 20-odd% that you are responsible for each of those organizations. There's a section in the auditor's report that's entitled Management's Responsibility for Consolidated Financial Statements. Management is responsible for keeping the books and the records and for preparing these financial statements. It's our job as auditors to express an opinion. So we don't give a guarantee, we express an opinion based on our work. And we don't give a guarantee because we don't look at 100% of the transactions for the whole year. That would be too time-consuming and too expensive. So we select a sample of the transactions that are done during the year, and from that sample we form an opinion about whether these financial statements are in accordance with the correct accounting principles, which was mentioned are a particular set of accounting principles that apply only to government organizations. Federal governments, provincial governments, upper tier, lower tier, etc., all follow the same set of financial statements, which are put out by the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. This year it's a little bit different in the auditor report in that we have what's called a qualified report. When I've stood up here before, I've said we had an unqualified clean audit report. We have a qualified report this year for one issue in particular. It has to do with the tangible capital assets. So in 2009, municipalities for the first time were required to do an inventory of their roads, sewers, buildings, rolling stock, etc., and set them up as an asset and depreciate them over time, just like a business would. And we carried Mary along through 2009, and unfortunately what happened at some point between 2009 and 2016, some assets got added to your list of capital assets that actually were not your responsibility yet. So a subdivision, once it's assumed by the municipality, you do a fair value assessment of the roads and the sewers and the street lights, and you put them on your books. Unfortunately, what happened is that process happened too early in prior years. So you have assets on your financial statements that shouldn't be there yet. We discussed it with management, and there was 2 options. Option 1 was don't issue the financial statements until they're able to go back and put the assets into the proper year and make sure everything's accounted for correctly. That was going to delay the issuing of the financial statements for a period of time that was indeterminate. They didn't know how long it would take to do the work, and we didn't know how long it would take to audit it once it was complete. So it may have delayed the financial statements for months. And I'm here a little later than I normally am, and I'll explain that as well. The other option was we have what's called a qualified report. So again, it's not a current year issue. It goes back to prior years, but we as auditors can't determine that the numbers in the financial statements for capital assets are correct. So we are not saying they're incorrect. We can't just determine if they are correct. So we have what's called a scope limitation. We couldn't complete our work. Not that there's a problem in the financial statements. There's no reason for concern. The capital assets are not subject to theft or anything like that. It's just a matter that we're not sure that the numbers in here are the correct numbers. So that's the qualified report. And it's all around subdivisions and when they got added to your list of financial assets. There is a work plan in place by management to make sure that those records are corrected. And once they are corrected, we as auditors will audit them to make sure that the corrections are in fact where they're supposed to be. So the other part of our audit report is opinion, and I'll read it because it is a little different than other years. So in our opinion, except for the effects of the matters described that I just described, the consolidated financial statements present fairly. So everything else we believe is correct. In all material respects, the financial position of the corporation of the town of Sagging Shores as at December 31st, 2016, and the results of its operations. When we complete our audit, we, as I said before, we don't look at every single transaction, and when we select the transactions that we want to look at, we use something called materiality. So when I read my opinion, I said in all material respects. There's a rule of thumb in auditing of government organizations that you take 2% of an organization's revenue, and that's what you base your selection of your transactions on. So in your case, your materiality number is about $540,000. That's roughly the same as it's been for a number of years. It hasn't changed. There was a new accounting standard that was issued within the last year, became effective within the last year. It has to do with contaminated sites. So we spend a bit of time looking at whether the municipality has contaminated sites. And a definition of a contaminated site is if it's a plot of land that you no longer use and has some form of contamination on it, then there's a liability that's set up. If it's a property that's still in use, you do not have to assess whether it's contaminated or not. So it's only abandoned sites that essentially have to get applied this criteria to. And so there was extra work done during the year by management to identify abandoned sites, and then we audited that, and there was none identified within the municipality. I'd like to thank the finance staff and all the staff in the town. When we come and do our audit, we don't just pick on the finance staff. We actually talk to people outside finance to make sure the information we're getting corresponds to what we're being told by finance. So I'd like to thank all the staff in the municipality. They were forthcoming, and we were able to complete our audit other than the capital asset section. I'll talk a little bit about some of the other pages in the financial statement. So page number 4 is called the Consolidated Statement of Financial Position. So this lists the assets and the liabilities of the town at its year end, which is the end of December. So we can compare December 2016 to December 2015. I'm not going to go through every single line. I'll talk about some of the ones that I think might be relevant. The first one is cash and temporary investments. A year ago, 2015, the total of your cash and temporary investments was about 10.6 million. And this year it's about 13.1, so you have more available cash at the end of 16 than you did at the end of 15. One question that I'm normally asked is how are we doing on tax collection? So there's a line there called taxes receivable, and you can see that for 2016 it's $1.2 million, in 2015 it's $1.2 million, so about the same amount outstanding in tax arrears year over year. But if you take a look at what the tax receivable is as a percentage of the current levy, so are we doing better at collecting our taxes? A year ago it was 4.52% of the current year levy, 2015 number, and 2016 it was 4.39. So you actually collected a greater percentage of your taxes this year than you did in 2015. So that's good news. You're able to collect things quicker. There's a couple of significant estimates in the financial statement to highlight for you. Down in the liabilities, there's a liability called landfill site closure and post-closure care liabilities. As you use a landfill site and close them, you're required for an ongoing period of time to monitor them and refurbish them. So this is an estimate based on a cost of living increase for closure costs, a discount rate. So that's a significant estimate. That estimate came in at $191,000, and a year ago it was $188,000. The other significant estimate is post-employment benefits liability. So previous councils made a promise to staff that you would pay their health and dental benefits if they retired before the age of 65. So again, there's discount rates, there's actuaries involved that say, based on our best estimate, they believe that liability at the end of December 2016 was $783,000, and a year ago was $780,000. So one of my statutory things to do is tell you about significant estimates in your financial statement. So those are a couple based on some things that are estimated by some professionals. The other number that's come up significantly is deferred revenue. So as you collect development charges, those are recorded initially as a liability and then are recorded as revenue later on once you actually spend the money. You have to match the expense with the revenue. So the deferred revenue this year is about $3.7 million, and a year ago was $2.1. So you collected about $2.5 million in development charges over the year. And so those go into the liability, and then as those are spent, they'll get recognized in revenue, not deferred revenue. So your accumulated surplus at the end of the year, $163 million, and last year was $163 million, so it didn't change a lot year over year. The next page, page 5, is the Consolidated Statement of Operations and Accumulated Surplus, and it lists the types of revenue that the town collects and then where those funds are spent. And again, reminding you, this includes your share of BOSRA and your share of SMART. So the total revenue for the year was $28.1 million, and budgeted was $28.5. So you received about $400,000 less than what you budgeted, and your expenses budgeted were $20.5 million, actual were $27.9. However, I should point out that in the budget column, you don't budget for the amortization on your financial statements, which is about $6.4 million. So really that 20.5 should be closer to 27 million. So yes, you were over budget on expenses, but not as drastically as what it shows in those two columns. I'm going to skip a long way along in the financial statement. I'm not going to go through all the pages. I thought I would go to page 13 though, which are notes to the financial statement. So as part of generally accepted accounting principles, you're required to make certain disclosures in your financial statement. So I'm going to talk about some of them. On page 13, note number 2 talks about your temporary investments. I'll give people a minute to catch up to me. So note 2, this is the first time we've had a significant amount of temporary investments, so it just shows you where those funds were invested at the end of December. Bond funds were about $1.5 million, Canadian corporate paper $1.6 million, and guaranteed investment certificates about $3.5 million. A decision was made to get those funds invested outside your current bank account. The current bank account did earn interest, but hopefully you will earn a better return on those temporary investments than the money sitting in your current account. On page 14, which is the next page, talks about the landfill site closure and post-closure care liability. If you were wondering what those assumptions were that I said are built into that liability, it lists them there in terms of discount rates, closure costs, etc. On page 15, note number 6 is entitled Long-Term Debt. That would be of interest. It gives you an idea of when your loans are coming due. You pay about $1 million a year in principal on your long-term debt, so it went from just over $12 million to just over $11 million at the end of December. And there are not any significant loans coming due until 2020 or 2024. So you'll make your regular term payments, but there's really nothing significant coming due for another 3 or 4 years. And the other question I usually get asked is about reserves. So on page number 20, it has the breakdown of your reserves, and your reserves went from just short of $18 million at the end of 2015 to 18.7. So you added about $700,000 to your reserves during the year, which is a good healthy increase in what you have available for future projects. I don't have a comment as to whether that's enough or not. Management will present a capital plan for you, and you'll have to determine whether you have sufficient funding to carry out that capital plan based on the $18.7 million you have in reserves. So that's the end of my comments on the financial statement. Last year, for the first time, we started this year-end report. Mayor Smith had seen this at County Council and thought it was a pretty slick summary of the goings-on in the municipality for a period of time. So I've given you a snapshot as of December 2016, but one of the attachments that you received was this year-end report that I'll go through now. Pretty small, you're not going to read that. So on page number 3, it talks about, oh, thanks, Linda, where are you today? So this is a summary of that statement of financial position that I talked about before. So it goes back to 2012 and compares right up to 2016. Some of the interesting numbers on there, your cash on hand in 2012 was $10.5 million. In 2016, you have just over $13 million in temporary investments and cash on hand. Your taxes receivable, I said this year, were about $1.2 million. Coincidentally, in 2012, they are about $1.2 million. So that seems to be the trend, is taxes receivable are stuck at about $1.2 million. As a percentage of the levy, it's been declining. Your levy in 2012 would have been significantly lower, so you've done a better job at collecting receivables even though there's the same amount outstanding. And the net financial assets is also an important line. Your net financial assets for December 2016 were $7.1 million, so you had more available to do current things with, $7.1 million, than you've had in the last 5 years. It's been somewhere around $4 or $5 million. It's significantly better at the end of 16 than it was at the end of 15 or any of the other years. The next page talks about cash flows. I'm not going to go through cash flows. It's just a breakdown of where your cash comes from and where you spend it. It's in your report for you to look at. Tangible capital assets. You can see that your tangible capital assets have been about $158 million consistently over the last 5 years, and that indicates you're spending about the same amount every year as what the depreciation is every year on those financial statements, that or on your tangible capital assets. That's why that number doesn't move a lot. One interesting ratio that we've been looking at the last couple of years is this tangible capital asset ratio. So it's a number, and really all you're looking at is the trend. So if you bought all your assets this year and had not depreciated them, that number would be zero. Excuse me, would be 100%. If you bought all your assets 50 years ago and they were fully depreciated down to nothing, that number would be zero. So that tells me of the assets that you own that are on your books, they are 60% through their useful life. They may not really be, but that's what that ratio tells me. And it's been about 65%. So your assets are getting older and not being replaced. I was asked by management when we had our meeting last week, what's that number for other municipalities so we can compare it? So I have access to some information for local municipalities. The low number that I found was 42, and the high number that I found was 65.8. So you're towards the upper end. Your assets are newer than sort of other municipalities around you, for whatever that's worth. As again, it's not a scientific number, it's just a trend for you to look at. We have a pie chart on where does your taxation revenue come from, and 89% of your revenue comes from residential or farm taxation. Very small percentages in those other categories. On page number 8 talks about taxation. So this was a chart that we started to look at what's the net municipal levy per capita. So what are you raising from the citizens on a per capita basis for the municipal levy? We had to make a little bit of an assumption because we only get the census numbers every 5 years. So when we have municipal population there, the 2012 number is the 2011 census number. The 2016 number is the 2016 census number, but what we did is we just averaged the numbers in between. So we got from 2012 to 2016, but I don't know that those are the exact population numbers, but for our purpose, they give us an idea about what you're raising from citizens on a per capita basis. And you can see in 2012, you raised $753 per capita, and in 2016, it was $909. So I'll talk about in the next slide why that is, but you're raising more from the residents to provide the services than you were in 2012. And we all know why that is. That's because your total revenue in 2016, 44% was raised from taxation and 7% was raised from grants. In 2012, that's the 2012 chart, raised from taxation was 36%, raised from grants was 13%. So you have 6% less from grants and you have 8% more from taxation. Provincial grants are down, so you have to raise that money from somewhere else. It's in the form of taxation and user fees. There's a 5-year comparison of expenses. I won't go through that chart. That's there for you to peruse. And then the reserves, there's a page there on reserves. It was in the financial statement as well, but that's just a summary. So you can see back in 2012, your reserves were about $19.4 million. They declined to a low of just short of $18 million in 2015, and now they're back up to 18.7. So you're plus $800,000, $700,000 from what they were a year ago, but you're down about $700,000 from where you were 5 years ago. Mayor Smith, I think that's the end of my formal remarks, but if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thanks very much, Mike. Any questions for Mr. Bolton? Councillor Minaj.
Mayor, thank you, Mike. And there was one thing I wasn't clear on, and that was the contaminated sites. I believe you said that those are municipal-owned properties, contaminated sites. They're not contaminated sites in the municipality. They're the property that the municipality owns. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So we're not looking for any contaminated site within the municipality. It's municipal-owned properties that we're looking at.
Thanks for the clarification. And the second one, talk about ratings and measured metrics and trends and scientific numbers. Quite often you see that a statement of this corporation is operating as an A, or it's 90% effective or efficient at what it's doing. Do you ever enter into the numbering or the lettering system saying, right now you're an A+, 2 years ago you were an A-, and sort of a measuring stick as to how we are year over year, or did I miss that point?
No, I don't have a measuring system. I'm not a teacher. I don't grade on a curve. My comments around the reserves on the curve. My brother's a teacher. That's okay. I can say that. So no, I don't have an ABC system. My comments are mainly around the balance you have in reserves and the balance in your bank account at the end of the year. Are you better compared to last year? Yes. Is that an A versus a B? I don't know the answer to that one.
Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Mike. When you started off talking about the consolidated statement, you mentioned specifically Baswar and Smart. And then later on we talked a little bit about Westerio as a different entity. Why is Westerio treated differently than Baswar and Smart?
So Basra and Smart, you are involved in the management of those in the sense that you have a council rep on there. Westerio, you don't have a council rep. You do have a rep. You don't have a council rep. And Basra and Smart are what are called government partnerships. So they provide a service that the municipality would otherwise provide, whereas Westerio is a business onto its own. So it's not consolidated. It's just carried at what your original cost was. Bell Canada. Yes. Yeah.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Through you, are we able to perhaps ask a question of the Director of Finance? Okay, you had, Mike highlighted a couple of notes. Anyway, you had a very specific statement in note 1 that we have about $6 million with one bank, one financial institution, and you're very specific about only $100,000 is insured. Is that, there must be something that just sort of gives us some protection beyond the $100,000. And I meant to ask you earlier today, Mark, but you've made very specific reference to the $100,000. Is this something that we should be concerned about? I have a couple more too.
I would say no. We have had great discussions about the insurance and the investments, etc., and I do not believe the municipality is in jeopardy at all by having these investments with who we have them with.
Okay. Note 11, which Mike mentioned, has a number of categories. There's one number that jumps out, and I'm sure that there's a reasonable explanation. It's page 21 on something. The numbers are not necessarily all in sync, but the very first line says donations, and then we had a budgeted amount last year of about $1.4 million, and the actual received was less than $100,000. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for why there's such a big discrepancy there. And if you can't answer it now, perhaps it's something that you might just follow up with later, because that's a big difference. And I bet there's just a definite answer, and you might not know it.
I'm sure there's a definite answer, but I do not have that tonight, but I will get it for you and let you know what it is.
Okay, and my third comment was we have talked a number of times about setting up the harbor and the trailer camps as business entities so that they sort of show up differently. Is that something that once we get that established, and I think we're working towards it, would that be something, Mike, that would fit in here a little differently if we had two municipal services that were showing up as that they're being run as business entities? How would they fit in here so that they're distinct but still part of the mix?
So not having been part of those discussions, I'm going to hypothesize about some things. So you would still control them, I presume, so you're not going to sell off 80% to local citizens. You still control them. So they're still essentially a municipal service. I don't think they'd be accounted for any differently than they are now. Similar to Basra and Smart in the sense that it's a service you would otherwise provide, so they would be consolidated still. And I may, if I could talk about the donation line item just for a minute, I don't know the answer, but I can hypothesize. I wonder if it was a subdivision that maybe you thought was coming on in 2016 and was budgeted as a donated asset. I'll leave that for you to consider, but that might be a reason.
Councillor Mike Matt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I sent the majority of my questions in earlier to Mark. Thank you very much, Mark, for all your responses. I know I sent a fair number of questions to you, but the answers were right on. Thank you. So I've dissected the numbers pretty thoroughly, and I just, in terms of the trending, Mike, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mike, the only question I really had was, is there anything, what I'm seeing with the trend lines is that it's pretty favorable. I think looks like we're in pretty good shape financially. The question to you I have is there anything within these financials that should cause any alarm to the town in terms of how we're trending through the various budget lines?
I don't know that I have a comment on a specific budget line. But I do want to talk about employee benefits. So you've already set up a liability for what you've promised for health and dental for retired employees, but there's nothing in here for OMERS. There is a note to the financial statement that's talking about OMERS, but OMERS is in a significant deficit, and if you give me a moment, I will find it. So if you have the financial statement in front of you, page 24, note 14 talks about a pension plan. So all the employees of the town, sorry, I shouldn't say all, the majority of the employees of the town belong to OMERS. During the year, just over $700,000 was contributed by the municipality to OMERS based on the schedule of remittances that's required based on employee wages. At the end of December 2016, OMERS reported a 5.72 billion deficit. So it was underfunded by $5.7 million, which, pardon me? Be a billion with a B. Billion with a B. Now that's actually down from a year ago when it was 7 billion. So will OMERS have to do something to rectify that? I guess. I don't know what that is, but that might be an issue that comes up in the future that you may be asked, or employees may be asked, to kick in a larger percentage to cover this projected deficit. But I don't have comments on particular lines in your financial statement, but that's one that caught my eye, is this big deficit in OMERS.
Councillor Rich.
Thank you very much to you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks very much for your presentation, Mike. I had a couple of quick questions. One, you were going through taxation. You said that we're 89% farm and residential. Now, is that a typical mix for a municipality of our size, or would you expect a lower percentage that is residential and a higher commercial percentage?
That's really a function of the makeup of your municipality. So something like Owen Sound would have a higher commercial industrial base than what you do. So it's not something that you can compare between municipalities, because each one's unique in terms of the makeup of its taxation.
I just kind of look at it from an economic development perspective as to kind of what kind of goals we should have as far as commercial development in our region would be.
That may be beyond what I can comment on.
No, I was just curious if you had anything. The other part was, and you did hit on it, there was a difference between our 2016 expenses and the actual of $7 million. And you went over it, but I kind of missed it. Could you just go over that again?
Certainly. Yep. So I think you're referring to page 5 of the financial statement, where we have a columnar presentation of the 2016 budget and the 2016 actual. The 2016 budget for expenses was $20.5 million. The actual expenses for 2016 were $27.9 million. So it looks like you've spent way more than what you budgeted for. I did say that in that $20.5 million budgeted number, traditionally the municipality has not budgeted for the amortization that's taken on the financial statement, but it is in the actual numbers. So we would have to add $6.4 million to the $20.5 million to have a true comparison between the two numbers. So 6.4 plus 20.5 were just about 27 million and spent 27.9. So you were overspent by 900,000, not 7 million.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mike. I just wanted to ask you a quick question about the tangible capital asset ratio that you raised, and I mean, you expressed it there as though that was an indicator of how much you're spending on your tangible capital assets. But I just wondered, and my English literature degree didn't do much to prepare me for a mathematics question, so I'm probably missing this, but or not understanding it. But wouldn't the ratio also be? I mean, we're a municipality that's growing quickly, right? And new roads getting put in, new infrastructure. We're expanding in a lot of different directions. So it could also be an expression, like that number could increase without us spending much on our capital assets if we grew quickly enough, because we'd be getting new assets that would be at 100%, which would affect the ratio. So I just wanted to make sure I understood that, or that was actually the case, that it's not purely an expression like that. If that number starts going down or going up, it may not necessarily be an expression of how well we're doing spending on the capital assets. It may be a mix of that and other factors. Am I right about that?
So when you say other factors, you mean assumed subdivisions as an example?
New tangible capital assets.
Yeah, so there's two ways to acquire new tangible capital assets. You can either spend your dollars, and that would make that number go up. Mm-hmm. Or you assume you assume a subdivision from a developer, and that gets on your books. And that was the qualification that we had, is that methodology wasn't quite right in the past. So if you assume a subdivision from a developer, that number will go up as well. You didn't spend your dollars, mm-hmm. but you assume the responsibility for that subdivision, so now it's on your books. So that would force that number up. but every year we're taking amortization not just on the new assets, but all the assets that you purchase back to the beginning of time. So there was this one. I didn't talk about this, but I maybe should have. So you see the 2016 column over on the right there. At the beginning of the year, the net book value, so original cost less amortization, the beginning of the year number was $158 million. You added purchases this year of $6.702 million. You disposed of some stuff and you took amortization of $6.467. So you spent just about what you amortized. So the new stuff is the $6.7 million. The amortization on all the stuff you bought and assumed right back to the beginning of the time was 6.4. It just happened to be roughly the same. So that's why capital assets didn't change a whole lot. So to your point, yes, that purchases number would include assumed subdivisions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions? Well, thanks very much, Mike. So there is a recommendation then, and I'll read it. The recommendation is the Council of the Town of Sagging Shores accepts the 2016 annual audited financial statements as presented by Mike Bolton of BDO. Any questions, comments? All in favor? Oh, that's carried. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is our 2016 year-end funding financial reconciliation. And our accounting coordinator, Christy Hansford, is going to present. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this report summarizes at a high level the housekeeping transfers required to balance the 2016 capital projects and to allocate the 2016 surplus to the appropriate reserves. These transfers are required for the 2016 financial statements, and they align with good accounting practices. Staff are preparing 3 follow-up reports for Council. These are a work-in-progress report, a reserves report, and a 2016 operating budget year-end report. You all received Appendix A. This summarizes the capital transfers to and from reserves as required to fund the projects compared to their budget. These funds will be used either to complete the projects in 2017 or to be returned to reserves to fund future projects, including those that may come in over budget. The net operating surplus for the year ended December 31st, 2016 from all activities is estimated to be $222,000. This surplus has been transferred to various reserves based on the revenue stream from which it originated. The net surplus will be transferred to the tax stabilization reserve. The net transfers to and from reserves for capital activities for the year ended is estimated to be $2.3 million, with $2.4 million allocated towards completing projects that were started in 2016. This resulted in a net capital over expenditure of $90,000. These projects to be completed may come in under budget, which may reduce or eliminate this deficit.
Thank you, Christy. So there's a recommendation, and then we'll take any questions. The recommendation is the transfers to or from reserves and reserve funds for specific purposes, as outlined in the attached tables, be approved for the 2016 year end. Questions? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the General Government Staff Report, and it has to do with our strategic plan, and our Chief Eagleson will present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In November of last year, MDB Insight was hired to develop and complete the town's first strategic plan. The project was supervised through an appointed steering committee with direct linkages to staff. While the project took longer than first anticipated, more time was allocated to the project as this was the first strategic plan for the town of Sagging Shores. The success or failure of any community is largely predicted on the people who reside, work, learn, and drive the community forward through day-to-day activities. The strategic plan describes a desired future for the town that protects those aspects of the community that residents value and responds to external influences that threaten the quality of life and sense of community residents identified as their reason for selecting Sagging Shores as a place to live. The Sagging Shores Corporate Strategic Plan articulates an actionable plan grounded in evidence, informed through an inclusive consultation process, and reflects defined responsibilities and accountabilities. It defines a vision, a mission, and guiding principles that represent the core values with which staff and council will conduct its affairs and govern the municipality. MDB Insight staff were positively surprised at the high level of community engagement through the process. In fact, the plan received input from more respondents than any other strategic plan the well-established firm has ever completed for any municipality. The guidance in the 2017 strategic plan is not radical and does not suggest an extreme change in course from the direction the municipality has been on for many years. The summary of findings from the plan confirms Sagging Shores is successful and benefiting from years of sound decisions made by council, staff, and the community. The strategic plan will be the foundation for future municipal decision-making and provide direction for setting budgets, allocating resources, and setting priorities on an annual basis. Staff will continue to focus on achieving a careful balance to maintain the day-to-day core service delivery and pursue initiatives that will maintain and secure positive future direction and growth for the town of Sagging Shores. Once adopted by council, the strategic plan will become a cornerstone of the town's commitment to accountable, responsible government.
Thank you, Phil. The recommendation is that council adopts the 2017 Town of Sagging Shores Corporate Strategic Plan as prepared by MDB Insight. Questions, comments? Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had one question to you, to Phil, or perhaps Director of Community Service may wish to answer. I did ask this question earlier, but I need a little bit more clarification. And with regards to the in the strategic plan, they talk about on pages 36 and 44. One of the recommendations is to complete a feasibility study for a new pool, walking track, and social gathering place for seniors. And then on page 45 of the report, Phil, it talks about, it indicates that a feasibility study has been completed. So I'm a little confused. I just needed clarification what we're talking about when we're talking about another feasibility study for a new pool. Because this goes back to 2007. We've got 4 reports on file. I think we've done all this planning, but could you clarify for me? What you're referring to in this strategic plan that we're about to adopt tonight, or receive? Was it adopt? What you're referring to when we're talking about another feasibility study for new pool?
I can say to the process that was used to formulate the strategic plan, MDB looked at all of our plans. So every plan back 10 years and really gave us a comprehensive look at what plans, and from now we'll make more of a matrix of what's missing. So I think Jane can answer the question directly to the pool, but I will say that in those several reports there may have been different wording for a feasibility plan when they looked at that many different reports.
Yeah, if I may, I think there may be an issue with some of the terminology in it, because there's no doubt about it, there was some components in the report from 2010 that included feasibility for a new pool, but what it didn't include was a business plan, and that's exactly what we're working on this year as part of the 2017 approved capital budget.
So we're not a feasibility study, we're really looking at a business plan. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. Through you to the CAO. If we adopt this, how do you see it being obvious how we're using it? Like how do you see how we can work this into things? How will it show up in the next little while if we adopt it tonight?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's a number of elements, Vice Deputy Mayor, that we will use. Number one is we'll start off with the communication plan so that our citizens are well aware of the priorities that council has set. Certainly when we make decisions, they will help be informed by the strategic plan. So when we look at priorities through our budget and our budget recommendations, things that align more or align better with the strategic plan would, in theory, get higher support from council. Staff will use it to inform our work plan. There's a number of items on the strategic plan that are populating our work plan now. If these are the priorities of council, then you'll see them rise above other priorities as well.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to say thanks to Phil, first and foremost, for all the work that you've done on this, Chief. I think I was reading through the document again today just to refresh my memory on all the points, and I think by and large, they're very solid and things that can be achievable and things we can work toward. And I think that the fact that we've gotten there is a credit to you and staff and everybody who's worked on it. So I appreciate that. If there's one quibble I have left with the document, it's a return to the thing that I mentioned the last time, which hasn't changed, and it's it's actually referenced two times, this one window approach. It's referenced with regard to our overall reduction of red tape, as well as to changes to the planning department. And that terminology, one window, has been in the planning world for a long time. They've talked about getting toward the one window approach, and it's just proved not to be very feasible, I think. At least they haven't been able to get there, and it's been in the lingo for a very long time. So I'm not suggesting that we take it out at this point. I just think that maybe we should be realistic about what that might mean, or I think probably the only way to get down to one or two or maybe three windows is to get rid of some of the agencies that are putting out there that have windows, right? And, tear down some of the houses, I guess. But I think that, and there may be some of that potential, some of that potential may be there to eliminate some redundancy in the system to get closer to a one-window approach. But I guess I would just express at this point a little bit of skepticism as to whether that one-window approach is really possible, and maybe it's more of a what's the word I'm looking for, a goal, but some sort of something to aspire to rather than something we might necessarily achieve. But otherwise, I think that the rest of the points are very much achievable and solid. And so again, kudos to you, and thank you for all your work. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So yeah, I've read a lot of. To be honest with you, I always was quite skeptical about strategic plans. I've read many of them, and they were often 200- and 300-page documents that tried to solve every problem, and so you end up really solving very few of those problems. But I think this one, very short, 40 pages or so, very concise. I think it's easy to navigate and see the goals in it. So again, I congratulate you on the work you did with that, Phil. So, if there's no further questions, all in favor? It's carried. So, our next item on the agenda is Environmental Services and Transportation Staff Report, and it has to do with the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund top-up funding application, and our Director of Public Works, Amanda Frosch, will present. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, staff has been looking at different funding sources for some of our initiatives that we want to look at. And the first one that we received notice of is our opportunity to do the OCIF top-up funding. We were given a budget amount of $607,083 this year as our amount we could apply for. When we looked at what we could do, there was a few criteria we had to look at, and for us, it's the number one and number two, the human health and safety, and then the high priority state of the local infrastructure and asset management plus financing. So one piece of infrastructure that we have that is aging and poses high risk to us is the supply line from the water supply in Southampton to the water tower. It's in our budget to be replaced, which is great, so the risk is mitigated by replacing it, but in the future, to have it twinned, to have two dedicated lines between the water treatment plant and the tower means that emergency repairs, all those things, there's a second line. It's like a flipping of the switch, and your tower supply has water freely flowing to it again. This water tower also provides pressure and supply to Son, so the two communities can apply together for this funding. We believe that that is a plus in our ability to get it approved. With the funding, there will be a piece that's required to be funded by the town of $67,453.66 as an average or as an estimate. So that work would be presented in the 2018 capital budget. So we would bring up some line items of what that detailed construction plan would look at for where that would come from. With that, we would analyze those roads with the capital projects to see if there was other cost savings to do the sanitary storm roadworks at the same time. And with that, that will be how the final alignment is determined as well. We also like the idea of the twinned supply line not having service connections on it. Right now, our trunk main has house services and commercial services on it. This would provide us an opportunity to have a trunk main that would be just a direct service to the tower.
Thank you, Amanda. And the recommendation is that Council authorize staff to submit an expression of interest for the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund for top-up funding for the installation of a twinning of the trunk water supply to the Southampton Water Tower, and copy MPP Lisa Thompson on the application. Questions, comments? Councillor Dave Mayett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Amanda, when the province notifies you of your limit, is this a little different than applying for grants as we've traditionally done? Because we've not had a great track record over the past, certainly this term that I've been involved with in getting any kind of grants, and they're not shy on telling us why either. But when they tell you, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, this is how much you can apply for, is there more confidence that we'll actually be granted this?
For you, Mr. Mayor, no, every year the OCIF top-up fund tells us how much we're allowed to apply for. This year it's less than we were allowed to apply for last year. Last year it was just over 700,000. So they determine that number based on different criteria that I don't know offhand, but in the letter that we got, it explains where that number comes from. We didn't get any of it. So last year was the water tower that we applied for. For this top-up fund.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that you addressed the water tower, or the mid-year 2017 budget update addresses the water tower issue in Port Elgin. But while we're on that topic, I guess I just wonder if you could give us an idea. I know it's been postponed due to lack of funding. What is our plan on that? Because I know it's in serious need of work.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we had a consultant go out and look at a lot of our water assets. So the intake in the lake, the Southampton Water Tower, and the Port Elgin Water Tower. We're bringing a report back in September that will share all the recommendations for all of that. But they have recommended lining of the Port Elgin Water Tower in 1 to 2 years, or full replacement. So because it's in the financial plan, then we can move forward with doing an RFP to have that work done.
Councillor Minaj. So I've read the recommendation. Any further questions? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, again, is Environmental Services and Transportation Staff Report, and it has to do with FCM funding for a risk management plan. And again, Amanda, our Director of Public Works, will present.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So FCM is a federation of Canadian municipalities, and they have two funding programs out. One is for asset management and one is for climate change. Our asset management plan is the tool that staff uses to help guide us in selecting capital and operating projects throughout the year. It also leads to renewal of infrastructure. Two pieces of the asset management plan that we're working on. One is risk assessment, one is level of service, and staff is happy to say that a level of service document will be coming to council this fall. Risk management is when you look at an asset and decide what the likelihood of failure is and what the consequence of that failure would be. It'd be very nice, very efficient if we could put that into a software tool where we could come up with a rating on different assets. So if it was a collector road, it would have a higher rating of risk than a local road. Arterial would be higher than collector. A trunk water main would have a higher risk because of consequence than a local water main. So we're looking at hiring a consultant that can put that matrix and software thing together to work with our asset management plan. For this funding, FCM funds 80%, up to a maximum of $50,000, and we believe that the work it would take for a consultant to do that would be about $50,000. And the projects have to be completed within the year, so we're looking to ask for $40,000 with $10,000 coming from the town. Because of the way our assets are laid out in the assets management plan, the funding source is considered to be 1/3 water wastewater, 1/3 from the gas tax, and 1/3 from the stabilization fund, so that can cover the facilities portion.
Okay, I'll read the recommendation and then we'll take some questions on it. The recommendation is that Council pass a resolution that supports staff's application for funding to prepare a risk management plan document in accordance with the application guidelines, and that the Town of Sagging Shores direct staff to apply for a grant opportunity from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Asset Management Program for a risk management plan, and that the Town of Sagging Shores commits to developing a risk management plan through a request for proposal for consulting services in this proposed project submitted to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Municipal Asset Management Plan to advance the town's asset management program. That the Town of Sagging Shores commits $10,000 towards the cost of this initiative. Councillor Minaj, did you have a question?
With the terms of reference in a document like this, and again, generally speaking, climate change is affecting things even as we sit here today. 100-year storms are now 500-year storms and 1,000-year storms. And tornadoes are emanating from Lake Huron and smacking into shoreline communities. Are these all of the things that are inside that risk management bundle that they will be looking at? The fact that there seems to be an escalation, or maybe it's just a blip, and high water levels, and is that all part of that?
Through you. Climate change funding is for different projects. So the one that we are looking at applying for that has to do with commuting, cycling, and that would be reducing cars from the road. So that's the climate change piece. The risk assessment, where it doesn't look at climate change because it's asset based. So it's about the water main, about the storm sewer, about that specific road in relation to other assets of its same category. So one road, its risk of flooding would be if it has low points or high points compared to another road. That would be the way it would look at it. Or if it is, say it's Market Street, it takes a lot more drainage than, trying to think of one that's up at the top and small. So up at Lennon. So Lennon doesn't have a big drainage area. So it would have a lower risk of flooding. So that would be how climate change is attributed to storm sewers, for example. It would compare that bridge to other bridges. So if it was closer to the 100-year flood line, then it would have a higher risk. But it would only be bridge to bridge, not bridge to water main, if that makes sense.
I think this is a great idea. I think this is where we're starting to go with all of our assets as risk management plans and capital asset management plans. It fits into the puzzle to give you a better understanding of what your risks are, what your long-term capital commitments are, and I really would commend you for that. So, Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
And I support this as well. I guess I've just on the climate change fund that you're coming forward with later on, would work on the drainage pits fit into that somewhere? Could you move that ball forward through that funding plan? I guess I just put it out there because that's a major issue we've struggled with for a long time and are a long way behind in terms of funding our upkeep of the drainage pits. And it's a huge mitigating factor against large rainfalls and a big issue, particularly in the town of Port Elgin. It's a thing we've been struggling with for a lot of years and not funding well enough, and we've known it for a long time. I guess I wondered if that was something that you could qualify for funding for, because I think it does relate to climate change. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure on how that one works. I've looked a lot of it for cycling and reduction of greenhouse gases is really what they're focusing on. When it comes to the drainage pits, though, we had a 2017 budget to do a storm sewer master plan. We didn't have staff to complete that, so we're looking at doing that in 2018. And when that lays out the framework, it will tell us where we should have trunk storm sewers, end of pipe facilities, drainage pits, those things. And once we get that framework put out, then we'll start looking for funding to secure implementing that plan.
So, any further questions? All in favor of this recommendation? That's carried. So, thank you, Amanda. The next item on the agenda then is Community Services, Parks and Recreation Staff Report, and it has to do with the Port Elgin Main Beach House construction and renovation. And our Director of Community Services, Jane, will present.
Thank you. Last time we were at the table talking about the beach house, it was referred back to staff to come up with several options for discussion that was moving forward for renovation in addition to the beach house at the Port Elgin Main Beach. We've met with the architect Steenhoff a number of times, and they provided us with 6 possible options moving forward. The option that staff preferred was considered option number 5 at a cost of approximately $500,000. And that option really ticked off some of the opportunities that we really needed in moving forward with the beach house. It included the family pods, which are so desperately needed at the beach, including renovating the existing washrooms that are there and the removal of the change areas within those washrooms to add additional stalls. It also included the municipal storage area, which is currently needed for deployment of our resources to manage the beach. Option 5 will permit also for the future expansion of additional washrooms if required and if approved by this council during future budget deliberations. What it doesn't do, however, is it doesn't permit, as far as operations go, allow us to be able to shut down the washroom facilities while we can keep another washroom facility open. However, we can deal with that through our operations and find alternative methods. Consultation for this project was also reviewed with the Waterfront Advisory Committee, and they too agreed that the preferred preference was option number 5. This still doesn't This project also does not provide for project manager, which will be an additional cost above the proposed cost rate. And at this point, there's no financial impact.
Thank you, Jane. And the recommendation is that Council approves option 5 as the preferred renovation at the Port Elgin Beach House, and that staff is authorized to proceed with the tender process. Comments, questions? Councillor Mike Matt.
Mayor, going from 1.2 million down to over 500,000 makes a whole lot more sense, and I think there's obviously some big changes too. Instead of 2 sets of washrooms, we're going with 1 set, and there's a lot of other changes, and I'll defer to other councillors to ask. I'm sure there'll be lots of other questions about the changes, but the one cost in here that I am a little concerned about, and that's the 12% project manager fee costs. 12% of 500,000 is $60,000 for project manager, and I need some clarification in terms of. We've got I know our chief building official and plumbing inspector and I'm sure our facilities manager. We added a new position to community services a year or 2 ago. Split the parks facilities manager into 2. We have a well-qualified staff, both parks and facility managers. I'm just wondering about the $60,000 in project management fees, if I could get a little more confirmation from staff in terms of why would we be spending $60,000 for a project manager to tear down some walls and add some new stalls. And I think we've got well-qualified plumbers and electricians and carpenters in town. That do they need $60,000 to be supervised? So what's in the $60,000?
That also includes architectural and engineer costing, which we don't currently have on staff, so it would include that part as well. We're also cognizant of the time commitment. Currently, if you're referring to our facilities manager taking on that process, our facilities manager was hired to manage our facilities, and certainly that's not in the scope of our resources that we have right now. So either way, we'd be having to pay for that cost.
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Minaj.
Not so much a question as a question of process. Then we've had this proposal in front of us several times, and many of us have spoken to the reasons why we're at this point in the public process, the consultation process that got us to this point. Actually, reinforced and suggested that it should be the bigger and better option. But of course, the bigger and better option came with that very high price tag. So my hope is, and you haven't called the vote yet, but my hope is that we don't defeat this tonight and send it back for another round of we don't knows. If that's the case, then, Mr. Mayor, I would sincerely hope that you would entertain a special meeting of council to discuss with staff what it is exactly this council and staff and the community think we should be doing here if in fact we can't go forward to this. So I'll be voting obviously in support of this. It's long overdue that we have the facilities that are required by the number of users that are on our waterfront. And I'm a little disappointed that there isn't more to it, but I understand that some way to control spending is also a good answer. So that's all I wanted to say, and I hope that if the vote goes the right way, then I'll be very happy, and if the vote doesn't go the right way, then I hope that you announce what the next process is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our Director of Community Services. Option 4 and Option 5. First question, Jane, can you explain to me what is more important? A2, the ladies and men's washroom, or D, the family pods?
The family pods ensure accessibility. And option 5, if I can just add a little bit more to that, option 5 is also taking care of our current assets, which, as we heard in our strategic plan, was one of the key priorities as well. Option 4 is adding on the additional washroom facilities.
And the foot wash stations are included in this?
They're included with all of them.
Okay. But option 4, I'm looking at our options 4 and 5, and 4 is $50,000 more, but it doesn't look like we're getting as much as option 5. Or is it just that A2 is that much bigger and costlier?
A2 comes with a cost. That's complete finishing of an entire additional washroom facility.
And that's pretty much what we really need, correct? The additional washroom spaces down there?
We need both.
We need both. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Further questions? Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask a question on the process going forward. Then the intention here then is, I mean, what we're really approving is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in any of these statements, Jane, but is that we're approving a set of amenities here really, and a sort of a rough estimate of where the lines are going to be drawn and whatnot. And you're going to take this direction if you get it. You're going to go back and get a design done, and you're going to take that design to tender. And then you're going to return here with a completed architectural rendering with the elevations and all that stuff, and a price.
And the results of the tender process.
And the result, which will give us a price, right? That'll tell us what it's going to cost. So at that stage, really, it's kind of a truncated process, really, which is, I mean, we need to move more quickly if we're going to get this done in a reasonable amount of time. But that's really there's going to be that ultimate decision for council to look. We don't really have a completed design here yet. We're going to have that once you're done all that with a price, and then at that stage we have to decide whether we're content with that look, content with that design, and content with that price.
Right. What I'm presenting to you are conceptual drawings, conceptual designs.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we need to go in depth for the next stage, so the development of that tender process, that tender package, and then results to be presented.
That's good, because I just wanted to clarify that, which is good, because we don't really have everything we need here to make a call, but we're going to get that at the end of what you're about to do.
That's right.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to clarify this. So Jane, D1 on option 5. If I look back at option 4, that's the existing washrooms that are there right now, correct?
Correct.
So in option 4, they will stay there?
Correct.
Will they be renovated at all or just left the way they are?
Left the way they are.
And then in option 5, they're renovated, but
in option
we
5,
won't get the big
in option
washroom.
5, they're renovated, and the existing change rooms in the washrooms, there's some change room partitions, they will be changed to washroom stalls as well. So you are increasing the number of stalls. In number 5.
Are we not increasing the number of stalls in option 4 as well?
You're building a whole new washroom facility adjacent to that in
Yeah.
number 4. And you're leaving the existing as is in option.
And all will be accessible, correct?
With the family pods will be accessible.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Further questions? Okay, I'm ready for the question then. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. So the next item on the agenda is the Community Services Parks and Recreation Staff Report, and it has to do with a loan to the Sagging Shores Minor Ball Association. And again, our Director of Community Service, Jane, will present.
And this is certainly working through some formalities. The Minor Ball Association has completed their second round of dugouts at Beaner Diamond, and they're asking for some financial assistance to assist with paying some of the invoices that have occurred through the process. We're offering them a 3-year payment plan that we're hoping Council will approve this evening. The association is certainly aware that the Recreation Master Plan did identify the need for additional diamonds. And with the question of long-term future of Beaner Diamonds undecided, they are certainly aware that there could be future opportunities to have ball games located at an alternative location. The municipal staff, we have not reviewed their financial position. However, based on the trend and the increase of participants, we're certainly confident of their ability to repay. So the financial impact is a $5,000 interest-free loan to be paid back to the municipality no later than September the 1st, 2020.
Thank you, Jane. Then the recommendation that Council approves an agreement to finance a $5,000 interest-free loan to Sagging Shores Minor Ball Association to assist in paying invoices for the recently constructed dugouts at Beaner Diamond 2 to be paid back no later than September the 1st, 2020, and further that an accounts receivable account be established for repayment with a payback agreement between the Town of Sagging Shores and Sagging Shores Minor Ball Association. Any questions to this? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, did the municipality contribute anything towards the cost, or was it totally coming from their end?
We did not budget anything for the capital budget as far as a contribution, if that's what you're asking. We did assist them minimally with the first round of dugouts that they provided, both with manpower and with a small financial contribution of under.
Okay, any further questions? All in favor? That's carried. So the next item on the agenda is communications, petitions for committee of the whole action. So we have a letter from MPP Sylvia Jones from Durham Caledon on Private Members Bill 141, Sewage Bypass Reporting Act of 2017. I guess there's 2 items there, but that's the first one. And I'd look for some direction. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
I just had a question, and since Amanda's here, do we, I don't recall in all my time on council ever receiving a report that we had this issue. Has, do we, have we had any issues here? I say we should support this, but, do we get an annual report about this? I don't recall ever seeing anything.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. This bill is going above and beyond what has to happen. So what they're asking for is that we notify the public within 24 hours of a bypass happening. In law already, as soon as a bypass happens, you have to immediately notify the ministry, and it is considered a spill. And that gets flagged in our monthly reports. Our manager of engineering would know immediately, and I would know shortly thereafter. It would happen when it happens. So we have not had any in obviously my tenure, but in history, even in Dave Burnside's time here, there were no bypasses from either of the plants. And if there were, they would be recorded, you would see them in those reports. So this bill wouldn't change any of our legal requirements. It would just, if something was to happen, then the public would be notified. Spills can happen, and if a spill can happen and not be dangerous, so that's sort of a risk with this.
Councillor Minaj.
If you're looking for direction, Mr. Mayor, I think this is about as open and transparent as you could possibly ever want to be, and I fully support it and recommend that we support it.
Okay, so and then we have two, Diane, and any further comments on it? All in favor of supporting? That's it. That's carried. So the next item is a letter from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs about the municipal election process, and I believe there's two questions in there. One about the requirement for 20, I think it's 25 signatures, and whether we think that's appropriate or not, and if that isn't appropriate, what would be the right number? So I'll start, Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have difficulty understanding how it could be difficult to get 25 signatures in any municipality. I think it's probably actually having to go out to get those signatures is just a great first step in campaigning in an election, in my view. So I can't see hardly any harm in it. I think it's only, I mean, I don't know if it's greatly positive either, but I don't see any harm in it. So I would say that if I was expressing, if my opinion were going to be the opinion of the town of Sagging Shores, it would be that this process is fine and that they don't need to change that threshold at all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm on the opposite end of that. I don't believe signatures should be needed at all. If somebody wants to run, let them run. They don't. When it comes time for the votes to be counted, that's where you get your signatures. I don't think if somebody wants to run, I don't believe you have to go and get approval beforehand.
Councillor Dave Mayap.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My opinion more aligns with the Deputy Mayor, but I can understand that in some circumstances, particularly if you're talking about areas in more remote locations and large geographic areas, like say an area in northern Ontario where you don't live in a specific town or an urban center, that it might be more difficult to get those type of signatures. But I think for our purposes, I don't see a problem with it, and I agree that it's a good first step to reaching out to see how much support you have.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I would ask the clerk if Linda, do you know why this developed?
It certainly was part of the review that the ministry undertook. Years ago, it was 10 signatures that were required, and they reviewed it. They determined that that 25 is the number. But it was the overall part of the review. I don't know the exact justification. We certainly, as a smaller municipality a number of years ago, the number of 10 did not appear to be a problem. I'm not saying that the number is right or wrong. I'm just saying there was justification in previous history.
So, let's note and file it. How's that? Very well. Okay, thanks very much. Then with the next item, there's communication petitions for committee of the whole information. There's 5 items there. If anybody, minutes. Oh, there's some correspondence from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change on acoustic emission audit update. Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
By surprise, I'm going to speak to this. I would just two things. I guess I would like, Mr. Mayor, for the municipality to send some correspondence back to the Ministry of the Environment, asking them, one, to make this testing mandatory, and asking them to, when they do make it mandatory, to ensure that one of the sites that they test is a place that's actually issued a complaint sometime in the last, well, ever, but in the last 12 months would be good. And also that if they don't receive anything this fall, that they should order the thing shut down permanently. because they have to make it mandatory and they have to put that backstop on it or they'll never get results. I think that's clear. So I would ask that the municipality send a letter on that to make that request to the ministry. I'd also ask, we have, as you know, as council knows, we were involved in doing a peer review of the work that was done up until it was stopped a couple of months ago. And in the last couple of few weeks, the municipality has requested from Unifor and from the ministry the information that was the results that were collected as part of that audit. We have been refused access to that information. So I would ask, Mr. Mayor, through you to the staff, for the staff to file a Freedom of Information request for the audit test data that was collected this spring, as well as for all correspondence between Unifor and the ministry related to the testing. I think we need to see what the results that they have collected to date are, and I don't know if we'll get that through an FOI or not, but I'd like us to file the request. So those are my two requests in response to that piece of correspondence, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Dave Mayap.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would second that motion that the Deputy Mayor brought up. I think it's well time and probably overdue time that we start to get more aggressive on this file and insist, as opposed to request, that the compliance is met and that the promises are kept, and that there be consequences, severe as they may be, attached to failure to comply. So I second the motion.
Councillor Minaj.
I need help then. I see a paragraph here that looks very positive, and maybe we should be thanking what's being said here. The ministry requests that all data collected to date be submitted to the ministry. Stop. Based upon the data submitted, the ministry will determine if there is sufficient data to assess compliance or determine if mitigation should be implemented until a full emission audit can be completed. That sounds to me like about as heavy language as they could possibly get out of that office, telling them, cough up the information you've got now, and if we think that there's enough information now, we'll follow through and take action. Shouldn't we be thanking them for that?
Well, I mean, I think the Deputy Mayor's request was that we release that information so that we have it, not just the ministry, and that we have been denied. And I think he's made that request that any information, the partial information that they have, the Sagging Shores would like that information. And so we're going to include in the letter. I think I don't have any opinion on what the information is or says, other than I think I agree with the Deputy Mayor that we should have access to it if the ministry has it. Why would they have to keep it secret? And I think we can craft a letter, and I just for clarity, I suspect we should direct it directly to the minister, because I think that person is probably the only person that has the authority to do much on this file. You want to speak?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to clarify that our request to date has been through Unifor, and they have denied our request for the information. The ministry has not denied our request for information. We're anticipating that they may, and that's, I think, that the prudent approach is through an FOI, but I just wanted to make it crystal clear that they have not said they wouldn't give it to us.
Okay, so I think we're clear on what we're going to do here. Is everybody clear? Okay, all in favor of that? That's carried. So the next item on the agenda is reports of department heads, and there's 5 information reports here this evening. The first one has to do with development charges and the treasurer's statement. If anybody has any questions specific to that. None, then we'll move on to the next one as the mid-year 2017 budget update. Questions on that? Councillor Myatt.
It was just a comment. I think that this year's midterm report is one of the best I've seen. It really brings us up to date and where we're at with really in each and every department. And I guess the only question I had again, they asked of the accountant, Michael Bolton, earlier to the CEO, David. Again, do you see any trends, anything that's alarming to us in the first 6 months. I see Westero dividends are down $50,000. I see that number. Is there anything you see in the first 6 months that should be of concern to us? Bag tag revenues, for example, Westero Power. Any other items in the first 6 months that we should be concerned about?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I don't. The Director of Finance and I sat down and looked through all of the things that caught our eye, and for each of the lines there was rationale for it. We're projecting now that we'll be on track for budget. In the previous report, it was reported that in 2016 we had a 220,000 plus surplus. Our goal this year will be to come in that budget.
Councillor Minaj.
Although I obviously will agree, I was interested to note that personally, I've only put the lawn watering on my grass twice this year, once in May and once this week. And in the past, I like my grass green, and I'm willing to pay for it. And I would imagine, and I think we're seeing a hint that the revenue from water usage is going to be down, and we may have to take some action. And I'd like to have a good, wholesome discussion about what that action looks like when 1 year it's dry and the next 2 years it's wet.
Okay, no further questions on that. The next item, or there's one there, I think maybe you wanted to speak to it a little bit, Jane, is Port Elgin breakwater. Just if you've got any short comments other than to say what.
Yeah, you will recall we had this conversation back in the spring, and it's now coming to fruition, unfortunately. But we're looking at a temporary closure of the breakwater through DFO. We've certainly had numerous conversations with them. This is so that they can conduct a thorough engineering assessment, particularly on the entire substructure of the breakwater. We expect that it'll be completed by the end of March, 31st fiscal year, and as soon as we have the results from that, we'll certainly bring those back and share it with Council forward. What's important to be aware of, but the public needs to know, is that these extreme measures are for the safety of all the users of the breakwater. So we will continue, like I said, to keep you posted on the results of those.
Thank you, Jane. The next item then is the minor sports subsidy. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. If there's no questions, we'll move on to the final one, which is the semi-annual development activity, which is great news. And I don't think there's any question. If there is any questions, let's just say that we are very busy. I think if you drive around our community, you will see it is very busy. And again, it's nice to see that people still value coming to Sagging Shores. So if there's nothing else, we'll take a motion to any questions, Mike. Yeah, go ahead.
What it was basically is I see 85 new housing permits, and building revenues are way up and surplus is up and things are looking good. And my question is to you, Bart, is we're looking at, I think it was $150,000 or $160,000 number for a project manager for the new police building, and I saw $60,000 today, although it was explained, project manager for the washroom, and I see building permits up and up and up, and I don't know the last time we've added a personnel to building, my question I have is, should we at some point, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Bart, should we, I guess my question to you, Bart, is, are we at some point are going to be looking at, as a heads up for extra personnel in building, and what's that going to do to surplus and so on and so forth? I'm just wondering about this project manager fee for police, and the washroom now $60,000, so that's $210,000, maybe a little less than that. Should we, at some point, have you staff at all entertained the idea of perhaps a retainer from a company rather than adding personnel to building, which maybe we'll see in this year's budget, I'm not sure. But has staff at all talked about, managing these projects to the, rather than adding full-time staff with benefits? Have you talked about at all how you're going to manage some of these projects and how they handle workload through building?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, sorry. The building code's fairly clear in indicating what we can charge for in fees, and
how we distribute those fees and costs in relationship to hiring inspectors or plans examiners or admin staff and all those type of things. So the fees that we collect actually pay for my wages and pay for our inspectors' wages and pay for Dana's wages. We're kind of a budget within a budget, if I can kind of explain it that way. And so when we talk about staffing of the building department, it has to be sustainable. Yes. And so the long-term goal is to make sure that we have a business plan that actually will run the department and that we're not going through dips and valleys and peaks and highs and lows. When we talk about project managers and building inspectors or CBOs, those are very, very different types of jobs. One's on the yin and the other's on the yang of the spectrum. One is, telling the other, this is how the code is read and this is, what you need to do to meet requirements for occupancy and final inspection. The other one's managing contractors, managing budgets, managing, a whole bunch of other pieces of the puzzle for no other better explanation. So I think that's kind of the best place I can answer your question.
If I can, and I'll build on what Bart was saying, because he's absolutely right, Councillor. I think there's two areas. One is the project management aspect of projects and managing those, and you're seeing that staff are bringing that as an option to council to get work done. And I think that the topic you're referencing is the workload in our building department, just based on volume of permit applications and inspections. The town is growing. We are a desirable location. You're seeing that through Bart's report. So Bart's had the foresight to start looking at his staff's workload. We've got feedback from our developers in terms of the expectations that they have. As Bart has rightly said, there's expectations from the building code that says how quickly he needs to respond to those. So he's been ahead of that, and will be working with the senior management team to develop solutions to make sure that we're providing the service in a timely way.
So, thank you, Bart and David. And that's the end of our agenda, so we'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Madison and Deputy Mayor Charbonneau, all in favour. We'll take a 10-minute break and reconvene for council.